quick check, and we'll start reading. Oh, there's a out loud reading section, so I'm just gonna put ASMR, because maybe this might be calming to some people. I'm gonna keep updating this. There we go. Alright, so little introduction. I've always wanted to do a reading on stream thing, just kind of more reason to read more books that I've been neglecting for a long time. And I couldn't decide which one to start with. I was going to do a different one, but yeah, I decided to go with this one instead because Kurt Vonnegut's one of my favorite authors. And I haven't read this one, I don't think. And this one's kind of more of a free write, so I'm into that kind of stuff. Hopefully you are too. Yo yo! Got the Beardo in the house, so how's it going? Alright, so this is the book I chose. This is a Kurt Vonnegut book. It seems to be almost just like a free write, where he just kind of just started writing and it became a book. I like the idea of it, so I'll show you some of the pictures you see. And I'll read the introduction, because I just read it beforehand, and it's quite different, so maybe I'll do a straw poll eventually of like what other books to read. That's good. Awesome. What did you start your day with? Nice. I love playing coffee. Alright, so the editor's notes for Hocus Pocus. The author of the book did not have access to writing paper of uniform size and quality. He wrote in a library housing some 800,000 volumes of interest to no one else. Most had never been read and probably never would be read, so there was nothing to stop him from tearing out their blank end papers for stationery. This he did not do. Why did he not do this is unknown. Whatever the reason, he wrote this book in pencil on everything from brown wrapping paper to the backs of business cards. So he just kind of like started writing it freehand, just needed to get some thoughts out, and it became a book. The unconventional lines separating pages within chapters indicate where one scrap ended and the next began. The shorter the passage, the smaller the scrap. One can speculate that the author, fishing through trash for anything to write on, may have hoped to establish a reputation of humility or insanity, since he was facing trial. It is equally likely, though, that he began this book impulsively, having no idea it would become a book, scribbling words on the scrap, which happened to be right at hand. It could be that he found it congenial, then, to continue on from scrap to scrap, as though each were a bottle for him to fill. When he filled one up, possibly no matter what its size, he could satisfy himself that he had written everything there was to write about this or that. He numbered all the pages so there could be no doubt. So, I don't know if he's actually talking about himself writing this or is this the character, but I'm pretty sure this is the actual. I think this is actually Kurt writing this. So, because he says at the end KV, but then again, he writes in such a weird way where it's like he'll take you through a thing where you think it's him, but it's actually talking about the character he created, kind of like Bob Dylan, I guess. If that makes sense. About there being Scantrell, nor about his hope that someone undaunted by their disreputable appearance would read them as a book. He in fact says here and there with increasing confidence as he nears the end that what he is doing is writing a book. There are several drawings of Tombstone. The author made only one such drawing, the others are tracings of the original, probably made by superimposing translucent pieces of paper and pressing them against a sunlit library window pane. He wrote words on the face of each burial marker. I'm going to back up a little bit. My chair here. And in one case, simply a question mark. These did not reproduce well on printed pages, so they had been set in type instead. The author himself is responsible for capitalization of certain words with whose initial letters a meticulous editor might prefer to see in lowercase. So too did Eugene Debs Hartke choose for reasons unexplained to let numbers stand for themselves except at the heads of sentences rather than put them into words. For example, 2 instead of 2. I like that. So he's, instead of using like numbers, you can see here, instead of like writing O and E, he just wrote number 1. So he's just messing around with format, which I like. So he may have felt that numbers lost much of their potency when diluted by an alphabet. So like he says there. To virtually all his idiosyncrasies, I, after much thought, have applied what another author once told me was the most sacred word in a great editor's vocabulary. That word is steet. Steet. I never heard the word steet. Interesting. I should check out what the word steet means. I'm going to quickly check. And then we'll continue the actual book. This is just the intro, so. Steet. No, I haven't, but I've heard of him. Does he mess around with format too? So steet is let it stand uses instruction on a printed proof to indicate that a marked altercation should be ignored. Actually, I have a dictionary. I could just use that. Keep it more. Oh, awesome! I love that. I'll have to check some of his books out. If you have any recommendations, feel free to let me know. So the work of pure fiction is dedicated to the memory of Eugene Victor Debs, 1855 to 1926. While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. While there is a soul in prison, I am not free. And this is the illustration of the tombstone. Alright, so this begins the book. Number 1. Not O-N-E, but just 1. And there's a bunch of people for some reason. I guess it will make sense. Oh, really? I read On the Road with Jack Kerouac. It's funny you mentioned the road, yeah. I have that book. Actually, that was one of the books I was thinking of reading, but I've already read it, so I kind of want to read something I haven't read before. But I might go back and read some of my favorites. On the Road being one of them. Really good book. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1. My name is Eugene Debs Hartke. I was born in 1940. I was named at the behest of my maternal grandfather, Benjamin Wills, who was a socialist and an atheist, and nothing but a groundskeeper at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. In honor of Eugene Debs of Terre Haute, Indiana, Debs was a socialist and pacifist, and a labor organizer who ran several times for the presidency of the United States of America, and got more votes than has any other candidate nominated by a third party in the history of this country. Debs died in 1926, when I was negative 14 years of age. So, I guess negative 14 years of age would be before you're 14? I don't know what that means. Or just means 14. Alright. Debs died in 1926 when I was negative 14 years of age. The year is 2001 now, which is, oh, that's more than 10 years ago, 11 years ago. If all had gone the way a lot of people thought it would, Jesus Christ would have been among us again, and the American flag would have been planted on Venus and Mars. No such luck. At least the world will end, an event anticipated with great joy by many. It will end very soon, but not in the year 2000, which has come and gone. From that I conclude that God Almighty is not heavily into numerology. Grandfather Benjamin Wills died in 1948, when I was a plus 8 years of age, but not before he made sure that I knew by heart the most famous words uttered by Debs, which are, while there is a lower class I am in it, while there is a criminal element I am of it, while there is a soul in prison I am not free. I, Deb's namesake, however, became anything but a bleeding heart. From the time I was 21 until I was 35, I was a professional soldier, a commissioned officer in the United States Army. During those 14 years, I would have killed Jesus Christ himself, or herself, or itself, or whatever, if ordered to do so by a superior officer, at that abrupt and humiliating dishonorable end of the Vietnam War. I was a lieutenant colonel with thousands and thousands of my own inferiors. So thousands and thousands of my own inferiors. So, if you don't know too much about Kurt Vonnegut, but he was, believed, drafted in the Vietnam War. So, I think he did a lot of writing out there. And Slaughterhouse 5, also a great book. Slaughterhouse 5, if you haven't read it, highly recommend it. Again, one of my favorites. He kind of hints towards some of that. Anyway, back to the book. During that war, which was about nothing but the ammunition business, there was a microscopic possibility, I suppose, that I called in a white phosphorus barrage or napalm airstrike on returning Jesus Christ. Whoa. I never wanted to be a professional soldier, although I turned out to be a good one, if there can be such a thing. The idea that I should go to West Point came up and unexpectedly as the final of the Vietnam War finale. Near the end of my senior year in high school, I was set to go to the University of Michigan and take courses in English and history and political sciences, and work on the student daily paper there in preparation for a career as a journalist. But all of a sudden my father, who was a chemical engineer involved in making plastics with a half-life of 50,000 years and as full of excrement as a Christmas turkey, said I should go to West Point instead. He had never been in the military himself during World War II. He was too valuable as a civilian deep thinker about chemicals to be put in a soldier suit, and turned into a suicidal, homicidal imbecile in 13 weeks. I had already been accepted by the University of Michigan when this offer to me of an appointment to the United States Military Academy came out of the blue. The offer arrived at a low point in my father's life, when he needed something to boast about which would impress our simple-minded neighbors. They would think it's an appointment to West Point was a great prize, like being picked for a professional baseball team. So he said to me, as I used to say to infantry replacements fresh off the boat or playing in Vietnam, this is a great opportunity. What I'd really like to have been given a perfect world is a jazz pianist. I mean jazz. I don't mean rock and roll. I mean the never the same way twice music the American black people gave the world. I played piano in my own all-white band in my all-white high school in Midland City, Ohio. We called ourselves the Soul Merchants. That's a pretty cool name, the Soul Merchants. How good were we? We had to play white people's popular music or nobody else would have hired us. But ever so often we would cut loose with jazz anyway. So he was kind of introducing, I guess at the time, music that wasn't so known to the white upper class, I guess, and just kind of sliding it in there, which is awesome. All right, back to the book. Nobody else seemed to notice the difference, but we sure did. We fell in love with ourselves. We were in ecstasy. Father should have never made me go to West Point. Never mind what he did to the environment with his non-biodegradable plastics. Look what he did to me. What a boob he was. I like when a lot of authors say boob. It was definitely a thing. My mother agreed with every decision he ever made, which makes her another blithering nincompoop. Another word you don't hear very often. Nincompoop. They were both killed 20 years ago in a freak accident in a gift shop on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. which the Indians Valley used to call Thunder Beaver, when the roof fell in. There are no dirty words in this book except for hell and God, in case someone is fearing that an innocent child might see I. The expression I will use here and there for the end of the Vietnam War, for example, would be when the excrement hit the air conditioning. This was written, good point, I think this was written in probably 60s or 70s. I'm not too sure though. Because most of his books are written in that time, but no, this might be when he was older. Yeah, I've never read this one, so this one was actually, I think 1990. It's written in 1990. So, just 1 second here. Oh. Here we go. Yeah, when the excrement hit the air conditioner. I like that. So instead of hitting the fan, when the shit hits the fan, when the excrement hits the air conditioner. Speaking of air conditioner, turn it up a bit. It's getting hot. Alright, back to the book. Perhaps the only precept taught me by grandfather Wills that I have honored all my adult life is that profanity and obscenity entitle people who don't want unpleasant information. Oh, I should zoom this in here. There we go. Yeah, pretty recent. So only like, what, 21 years ago? But I don't know if it was transcribed or... Yeah, no, it was 90. So it was like, I was 1 year old when this book was made. I think Slaughterhouse 5 was made in probably, I would say late 70s, but I can't remember, honestly. Because it does talk about the Vietnam War quite a bit, so I think it's referenced in pretty much every one of his books. Except for maybe the sci-fi one I read by him. That one was pretty good. Okay. So perhaps the only precept taught me by grandfather Wills that I've honored all my adult life is that profanity, obscenity entitle people who don't want unpleasant information, so close their ears and eyes to you. The more alert soldiers who served under me in Vietnam would comment in some amazement that I had never used profanity, which made me unlike anybody else they had ever met in the army. They might ask if this was because I was religious. I would reply that religion had nothing to do with it. I'm in fact pretty much an atheist, like my mother, father, although I kept that to myself. Why argue somebody else out of the expectation of some sort of an afterlife? I don't use profanity, I would say, because your life and the lives of those around you may depend on your understanding what I tell you. Okay? Okay. I resigned my commissions in 1975 after excrement hit the air conditioning, not failing, however, to father a son on my way home. Unknowingly, during a brief stopover in the Philippines, I thought surely that the subsequent mother, a young female war correspondent for the Des Moines Register, was using foolproof birth control. Wrong again. Booby traps everywhere. Oh my god. Got booby trapped for sure. The biggest booby trap fate set for me, though, was a pretty personable young woman named Margaret Patton, who allowed me a woo and marry her soon after my graduation from West Point, and then had 2 children by me without telling me that there was a powerful strain of insanity on her mother's side of her family. Holy shit. So then her mother, who was living with us, went insane, and then she herself went insane. Our children, moreover, had every reason to suspect that they too might go crazy in middle age. Our children, full grown now, can never forgive us for reproducing. What a mess. I realize that my speaking of my first and only wife is something as inhuman as a booby trap risks my seeming to be yet another infernal device. But many other women have had no trouble relating to me as a person. And ardently too. And my interest in them has gone well beyond the merely mechanical, almost invariable. I have been as enchanted by their souls, their intellects, and the stories of their lives by their amorous prophesies. But after I came home from Vietnam War, And before either Margaret or her mother had shown me and the children and the neighbors great big symptoms of their inherited craziness, that mother-daughter team treated me like some sort of boring but necessary electrical appliance, like a vacuum cleaner. Oh well, like a vacuum cleaner. Good things have also happened unexpectedly, manna from heaven. You might want to call them, but not in such quantities as to make life a bowl of cherries or anything approaching that. Right after my war, when I had no idea what to do with the rest of my life, I ran into a former commanding officer of mine who had become president of Tarkington College in Scipio, New York. I was then only 35, and my wife was still sane, and my mother-in-law was only slightly crazy. He offered me a teaching job, which I accepted. I could accept that job with a clear conscience. uh, Despite my lack of academic credentials beyond a mere BS degree from West Point, since all students at Tarkington were learning disabled in some way, or plain stupid, or comatose, or whatever, no matter what the subject, my old co assured me I would have little trouble keeping ahead of them. The particular subject he wanted me to teach, what's more, was I was in which I had excelled at the academy, which was physics. The greatest stroke of luck for me, the biggest chunk of manna from heaven, was that Tarkington had need of somebody to play the Lutz Carleon. What is that? Lutz Carleon? I guess it's part of a play. Oh no, it's not. It's a great bell. It's a bell. Oh, okay. Alright. So here we go. The Tarkington had need of someone to play the Lutz Carleon, the great family of bells at the top of the tower of the college library, where I am writing now. So this person's writing on top of the bell tower. I asked my old co if the bells were swung by ropes. He said they used to be, but they had been electrified. What? And were played by means of keyboard now. Oh, it's weird when you read something like that, like electrified, you think it's actually going to hurt you if you touch it. But they actually just mean like electronic bells. So that's a little different. Okay, what does the keyboard look like, I said. Like a piano, he said. I had never played bells. Very people have that clanging opportunity, but I could still play a piano. So I said, shake hands with your new Carlior. Carlior? I don't know how to say that, pronounce that. The happiest moments in my life, without question, were when I played the Lutz Carleon at the start and end of every day. The way he's paraphrasing or just separating the sentences is interesting too. If you look, it's kind of like split up. So this is just like one little paragraph saying the happiest moments in my life, without question, were when I played the Lutz Carleon at the start and end of every day. Actually, I'm gonna underline that because to me that's interesting, and I think something that sticks out. So yeah, that's what I tend to do. I tend to I like to underline the pages that I finished in case I lose my page for whatever reason, and then use pencil so that way you can always erase it. And I like to circle things that stick out to me personally, or things I find interesting. I'll write maybe sometimes little side notes. It just helps me focus on what I'm reading. So that's just the thing I do. I went to work at Tarkington 25 years ago and have lived in this beautiful valley ever since. This is home. I have been a teacher here. I was a warden for a little while after Tarkington College officially became Tarkington State Reformatory in June of 1999, 20 months ago. Now I myself am a prisoner here, but with pretty much the run of the place. I haven't been convicted of anything yet. I'm waiting trial, which I guess will take place in Rochester, for supposedly having masterminded the mass prison break at the New York State Maximum Security Adult Correctional Institution. Say that 10 times fast. New York State Maximum Security Adult Correctional Institution. It's a lot of words. And Athena, across the lake from here. Turns out I also have tuberculosis. I have terrible pronouncing words sometimes. And my poor addled wife, Margaret, and her mother have been put by court order into a lunatic asylum in Batavia. Always forget, yeah. I mean, if you can read the book and don't need to do that, it might not be necessary. But for me, it just helps me keep focus, I guess. And yeah, just underline the pages or the page I left off at. I find it's like a save point. It's like in video games, I'm obsessed with saving. I'm obsessed with doing that too. So I try to do that usually whenever I can. Whenever I finish a page, I'll underline it, or I'll give a few pages sometimes too. Like this, I'm probably not going to underline that because it's such a small section. But when I'm finished chapter 2, or the first page of chapter 2, then yeah. So New York, something I had never had the guts to do. I'm so powerless and despised now that the man I am named after, Eugene Debs, if he were still alive, might be at last be somewhat fond of me. Chapter 2. Alright. The more optimistic times when it was not widely understood that human beings were killing the planet with the byproducts of their own ingenuity, and that a new ice age had begun in any case, the generic name for the sort of horse-drawn covered wagon that carried freight and settlers across the prairies of what was to become the home of the United States of America, and eventually cross the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, was Conestoga. Since the first of these were built in the Conestoga Valley of Pennsylvania, they kept the pioneers supplied with cigars among other things, so that cigars nowadays in the year 2001 are still called stogies, sometimes which is short for Conestoga. So that's what cigar would really be. It's Conestoga. I never knew that. See, that's an interesting word. I'm probably going to write that, underline that. Alright, back to the book. By 1830, the sturdiest and most popular of these wagons were in fact made by the Mohiga Wagon Company right here in Skopje, New York, at the pinched waist of Lake Mohogia, the deepest and coldest and westernmost of the long and narrow Finger Lakes. So sophisticated cigar smokers might want to stop calling their stink bomb stogies and call them moogies or higgies instead. Okay. So a lot of interesting, sense of humor in this. Hey, thank you so much for the follow. Page 6. Cool name. Cool name. The founder of the Mohogia Wagon Company was Aaron Tarkington, a brilliant inventor and manufacturer who nevertheless could not read or write. He now would be identified as a blameless inheritor of the genetic defect known as dyslexia. He said of himself that he was like the Emperor Charmelange? Too busy to learn to read and write. He was not too busy, however, to have his wife read to him for 2 hours every evening. He had an excellent memory, for he delivered weekly lectures to the workmen at the factory that were laced with lengthy quotations from Shakespeare and Homer and the Bible and on and on. He served 4 children, a son, and 3 daughters, all of whom could read and write, but they still carried the gene of dyslexia, which would disqualify several of their own descendants from getting very far in conventional schemes of education. 2 of Aaron Tarkington's children were so far from being dyslexic, in fact, as to themselves write books, which I have read only now, and which nobody probably will ever read again. Aaron's only son, Elias, wrote a technical account of the construction of the Onondaga Canal, which connected the northern end of Lake Mohogia to the Erie Canal just south of Rochester. And the youngest daughter, Felicia, wrote a novel called Carpathia, about headstrong, high-born young women in the Mohogia Valley who fell in love with a half-Indian lock tender on that same canal. The canal is all filled and paved over now, and is Route 53, which forks at the head of the lake, where the locks used to be. One fork leads southwest through farm country, the Skopje. The other leads southwest through the perpetual gloom of the Iroquois National Forest to the bald hilltop crowned by the battlements of the New York State Maximum Security Adult Correctional Institution at Athena, a hamlet directly across the lake from Skopje. Bear with me, this is history. I'm trying to explain how this valley, this verdant cul-de-sac, got to be what it is today. All three of Aaron Tarkington's daughters married into prosperous and enterprising families in Cleveland, New York, and Wilmington, Delaware, innocently making the threat of dyslexia pandemic in an emerging ruling class of bankers and industrialists, largely displaced in my time by Germans, Koreans, Italians, English, and of course Japanese. The son of Aaron, Elias, remained in Skopje and took over his father's properties, adding to them a brewery and a steam-driven carpet factory, the first such in the state. There was no water power in Skopje, whose industrial prosperity until the introduction of steam was based not on cheap energy and locally available raw materials, but on inventiveness and high standards of workmanship. Elias Tarkington never married. He was severely wounded at the age of 54, while a civilian observer at the Battle of Gettysburg, top hat and all. He was there to see the debuts of two of his inventions, a mobile field kitchen and pneumatic recoil mechanism for heavy artillery. The field kitchen, incidentally, with slight modifications, would later be adopted by the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and then by the German army during World War I. So his inventions were taken over by the circus and then the German army? What? What a crazy thing to happen. Elias Tarkington was a tall and skinny man with his chin, whiskers, and stovepipe hat. He was shot through the right chest at Gettysburg, but not fatally. The man who shot him was one of the few Confederate soldiers to reach the Union lines during Pickett's charge. That Johnny Reb died in ecstasy among his enemies, believing that he had shot Abraham Lincoln. A crumbling newspaper account I have found here in what used to be the college library, which is now the prison library, gives his last words as follows: "Go home, bluebellies. Old Satan's died." D-A-I-D. Died. During my 3 years in Vietnam, I certainly heard plenty of last words of dying American foot soldiers. Not one of them, however, had illusions that he had somehow accomplished something worthwhile in the process of making the supreme sacrifice. One boy of only 18 said to me while he was dying and I was holding him into my arms, "Dirty joke, dirty joke." So now we're on chapter 3. I think I'll read maybe one or two more chapters, and then might be playing some Yakuza 0 for a bit. So if you want to stay tuned for that. Elias Tarkington, the severely wounded Abraham Lincoln look-alike, was brought home in one of his own wagons to Skopje, to his estate overlooking the town and lake. He was not well educated and was more a mechanic than a scientist, and so spent his last 3 years trying to invent what anyone familiar with Newton's laws would have known was an impossibility, a perpetual motion machine. He had no fewer than 27 contraptions built, which he foolishly expected to go on running, after he had given them an initial spin or whack, until Judgment Day. Oh, thanks, buddy. I found 19 of those stubborn, mocking machines in the attic of what used to be their inventor's mansion, which in my time was the home of the college president. About a year after I came to work at Tarkington, I brought them back downstairs into the 20th century. Some of my students and I cleaned them up and restored any parts that had deteriorated during the intervening 100 years. At the least, they were exquisite. Jewelry with garnets and amethysts for bearings. 1 second, I'm going to have some water. Alright. With arms and legs of exotic woods, with tumbling balls of ivory, with chutes and counterweights of silver, it was as though dying Elias hoped to overwhelm science with the magic of precious materials. The longest my students and I could get the best of them to run was 51 seconds, some eternity. To me, and I passed this on to my students, the restored devices demonstrated not only how quickly anything on Earth runs down without steady infusions of energy, they reminded us too of the craftsmanship no longer practiced in the town below. Nobody down there in our time could make things that cunning and beautiful. Yes, and we took the 10 machines we agreed were the most beguiling, and we put them on a permanent exhibit in the foyer of this library underneath a sign whose words can surely be applied to this whole ruined planet nowadays. The complicated futility of ignorance. I've discovered from reading old newspapers and letters and diaries from back then that the men who had built the machines for Elias Tarkington knew from the first that they would never work. Whatever the reason, yet what love they lavished on the materials that compromised them. How is this for a definition of high art? Making the most of the raw materials of futility. Just as he's talking about these inventions. Still another perpetual motion machine envisioned by Elias Tarkington was what his last will and testament called the Mohoga Valley Free Institute. Upon his death, the new school would take possession of his 3,000-hectare estate above Skopje, plus half the shares in the wagon company, the carpet company, and the brewery. The other half was already owned by his sisters far away. On his deathbed, he predicted that Skopje would one day be. So it's weird. He uses the one instead of like O-N-E, even when he's writing, like in the paragraphs. So that threw me off. I kept saying I, but he's saying one. So one day would be a great metropolis, and that its wealth would transform his little college into a university to rival Harvard and Oxford and Heidelberg. It was to offer free college education to persons of either sex and of any age or race or religion, living within 40 miles of Skopje. Those from farther away would pay a modest fee. In the beginning, it would have only one full-time employee, the president. The teachers would be recruited right there in Skopje. They would take a few hours off from work each week to teach what they knew. The chief engineer at the wagon company, for example, whose name was André Lutz, was a native of Liège, Belgium, and had served as an apprentice to a bell founder there. He would teach chemistry. His French wife would teach French and watercolor painting. The brewmaster at the brewery, Hermann Schultz, a native of Leipzig, would teach botany and German, and the flute. The Episcopalian priest, Dr. Alan Clues, a graduate of Harvard, would teach Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and the Bible. The dying man's physician, Dalton Polk, would teach biology and Shakespeare, and so on. And it came to pass. In 1869, the new college enrolled in its first class, 9 students in all, and from right here in Skopje, 4 were of ordinary college age. One was a Union veteran who had lost his legs at Shiloh. One was a former black slave, 40 years old. One was a spinster, 82 years old. The first president was only 26 years old, a school teacher from Athena, 2 kilometers by water from Skopje. There was no prison over there back then, but only a slate quarry and a sawmill and a few subsistences farms. Oh, which phrase? I'm going to underline it. He was a cousin of the Tarkingtons. So there was no prison over there back then, but only a slate quarry and a sawmill and a few subsistence farms. His name was John Peck. Oh, and it came to pass. Yeah, me too. I like that phrase a lot as well. There was a song in one of the Johnny Depp movies that I found this artist, and I think the song is called "Come to Pass" or something. It was actually a really touching song. Okay. Let me actually underline that because I said I would. There we go. And it came to pass. There was no prison over there back then, but only a slate quarry and a sawmill and a few subsistence farms. His name was John Peck. He was a cousin of the Tarkingtons. His branch of the family, however, was and remains unhampered by dyslexia. He has numerous descendants in the present day, one of whom, in fact, is a speechwriter for the Vice President of the United States. Young John Peck and his wife and 2 children and his mother-in-law arrived. arrived at Skopje by rowboat, with Peck and his wife at the oars, their children seated. Oh, I'm like, my phone's moving. Why is my phone moving? Someone's trying to call. I'm gonna close that for now. Okay. You'll see in the stern, and their luggage and the mother-in-law. Okay, I'll make sure I didn't miss anything. Let's go from here. One of whom, in fact, is a speechwriter for the Vice President of the United States. Young John Peck and his wife and two children and his mother-in-law arrived at Skopje by rowboat, with Peck and his wife at the oars, their children seated in the stern, and their luggage and the mother-in-law in an other boat they towed behind. They took up residence on the third floor of what had been Elias Tarkington's mansion. The rooms on the first floor would be classrooms, a library which was already a library with 280 volumes collected by the Tarkingtons, study halls, and a dining room. Many treasures from the past were taken up to the attic to make room for new activities. Among these were the failed perpetual motion machines. They would gather they would gather dust and cobwebs until 1978, when I found them up there and realized that they were, and brought them downstairs again. 1 week before the classes was held, which was in Latin, taught by the Episcopalian priest Ellen Clues, Andre Lutz, the Belgian, arrived at the mansion with 3 wagons carrying a very heavy cargo, a carillon consisting of 32 bells. He had cast them on his own time and at his own expense. In the wagon factory's foundry, they were made from mingled Union and Confederate rifle barrels and cannonballs and bayonets gathered up after the Battle of Gettysburg. They were the first bells, and surely the last bells, ever to be cast in Skopje. Nothing, in my opinion, will ever again be cast in Skopje. No industrial arts of any sort will ever again be practiced here. Andre Lutz gave the college all those bells, even though there was no place to hang them. He said he did it because he was so sure that it would one day be a great university with a bell tower and everything. He was dying of emphysema as a result of the fumes from molten metals that he had been breathing since he was 10 years old. Oh, shit. He had no time to wait for a place to hang. The most wonderful consequence of his having been alive for a little while, well, all those little bells. They were no surprise. They had been 18 months in the making. The founder, whose work he supervised, had shared his dream of immortality as they made strings as impractical and beautiful as bells. Bells. So all but the bells, but one from a middle octave, were slathered with grease to prevent from their rusting and stored in 4 ranks in the East State Great Barn, 200 meters from the mansion. The one bell that was going to get to sing at once was installed in the cupola of the mansion, with its rope running all the way down to the first floor. It would call people to chases and, if need be, also serve as a fire alarm. The rest of the bells, it turned out, would slumber in the loft for 30 years until 1899, when they were hanged as a family. The one from the cupola included 1 axles in the belfry of the tower of a splendid library given to the school by the Molenkamp family of Cleveland. The Molenkamps were also Tarkingtons, since the founder of the fortune had married a daughter of the illiterate Aaron Tarkington. 11 of them so far had been dyslexic, and they had all gone to college in Skopje, since no other institution of higher learning would take them in. The first Molenkamp to graduate from here was Henry, was enrolled in 1875. He was 19. And when the school was only 6 years old, it was at that time that the name was changed to Tarkington College. Oh, so that's why it got changed. The dyslexic guy, I guess. A literate person owning a college, that's like, I guess, ironic? I don't know. It's interesting. Three of the 6 trustees were men who had married daughters of Aaron Tarkington, one of the great-grandfather of Henry Molenkamp. The other 3 trustees were the mayor of Skopje, and the lawyer who looked after the Tarkington daughters' interest in the valley, and the area congressman who was surely the sister's faithful servant too. since they were partners with the college in his district's most important industries. And according to the minutes, which fell apart in my hands as I read them, alright, bear with me. It was the grandfathers of young Henry Mollenkamp who proposed the name change, saying that the Mohega Valley Free Institute sounded too much like a poorhouse or hospital. It's weird, the word propose is all it kind of scratched out for some reason. It is my guess that he would not have minded having the place sound like a catchment for the poor, if only he had not suffered the misfortune of having his own grandson go there. It was in the same year, 1875, that work began across the lake of Skopje, on a hilltop above Athena, on a prison camp for young criminals from big city slums. It was believed that fresh air and the wonders of nature would improve their souls and bodies to the point that they would find it natural to be good citizens. Whoa. So the fresh air would change criminals to good citizens. That is a very weird way of thinking. It's like Clockwork Orange-ish, but like nature. But hey, maybe that could be a thing. Maybe that's all we kind of need sometimes to keep from making a mistake. It's just fresh air. So nature would prove their souls and their bodies to the point that they would find it natural to be good citizens. When I came to work at Tarkington, there were only 300 students, a number that hadn't changed for 50 years. But the rustic work camp across the lake had become a brutal fortress of iron and masonry. On a naked hilltop, the New York State maximum security adult correctional institution at Athena, keeping 5,000 of the state's worst criminals under lock and key. Sorry I made that so long just so I could read it. 2 years ago, Tarkington still had only 300 students, but the population of the prison, under hideously overcrowded conditions, had grown to 10,000. And then, one cold winter's night, it became the scene of the biggest prison break in American history. Until then, nobody ever escaped from Athena. Suddenly everybody was free to leave, and to take weapon from the prison armory too. If he had to use that for one, the lake between the prison and the little college was frozen solid, as easily traversed as the parking lot of a great shopping mall. What next? Yes, by the time Andre Lutz's bells were at last made to string as Carleon, Turkington College had not only a new library, but luxurious dormitories, a science building, an art building, a chapel, a theater, a dining hall, an administration building, 2 new buildings of classrooms and athletics facilities that were the envy of the institutions which it had begun to compete in track and fencing and swimming and baseball, which were Hobart, the University of Rochester, Cornell, Union, Amherst, and Bucknell. These structures bore the names of wealthy families. As graduated as the Mollenkamps, for the college had managed to do for the offspring of theirs, whom conventional colleges had deemed ineducatable. Most were unrelated to the Mollenkamps or to anyone who carried the Tarkington gene of dyslexia, nor were the young they sent to Tarkington necessarily troubled by dyslexia. So it sounds to me that he's kind of like griping with the whole, like, what's called institution of school systems and stuff. He's kind of like being sarcastic about it in a way, in almost like a dark humor, kind of like Outer Worlds. What was the game? It was called Outer Worlds? Yeah. Kind of has that same kind of sense of humor. I'm enjoying it so far, actually. It's pretty good. So nor were the young they sent to Tarkington necessarily troubled by dyslexia. All sorts of different things were wrong with them, including an inability to write legibly with pen and ink, although that they tried to write down made perfect sense, and stammering so severe as to prevent their saying a word in class, and petit mal, which caused their minds to go perfectly blank for seconds or minutes, anywhere, anytime, and so on. Petit mal. I'm going to underline that word. That's an interesting word to me. Petit mal. I know I've heard that word before, I just don't know what it means. I have to look it up. Petit mal. Sounds almost like a food, but I know it's not. Yeah, petit mal seizures. I've heard of that, but what is... Oh yeah, so it is epilepsy. Okay. Because I heard mal seizure, I know that, but I didn't hear petit mal. So it's a brief loss of awareness which can be accompanied by blinking or mouth twitching. Petit mal seizures have a very characteristic appearance on an electronic photogram, EEG. The EEG machine, I guess, would be the thing. Alright, back to the book. Okay. Cause their minds to go perfectly blank for seconds or minutes, anywhere, anytime, and so on. So you prevent their saying a word in class. So he's just saying that they just blanked out. I don't think they actually had seizures. Okay, sounds good. Cause their minds to go perfectly blank for seconds or minutes, anywhere, anytime, and so on. It was simply the Molenkamps who first challenged the new little college to do what it could for a seemingly hopeless cause of plutocratic juvenile incapacity, namely Henry. Not only would Henry graduate with honors from Tarkington, he would go on to Oxford, taking with him a male companion who read aloud to him and wrote down thoughts Henry could only express orally. Henry would become one of the most brilliant speakers in a golden age of American purple, bow wow oratory, and serve as congressman and then a United States Senator from Ohio for 36 years. Oh my god, so this guy... No way. That's the same guy who's illiterate? Yeah, I think so. Aaron Tarkington. Oh, no, Aaron's illiterate. I don't know if this guy is. That'd be funny if the illiterate guy became president, because that would be almost too true to life. Anyway, yeah, like 17 years later of this book being made. But, yeah. That's funny. It was simply the Molenkamps whose first challenged the new little college to do what it could for a seemingly hopeless cause. I already read all that, sorry. So that same Henry Molenkamp was author of the lyrics to one of the most popular turn-of-the-century ballads, Mary, Mary, Where Have You Gone? The melody that ballad was composed by Henry's friend Paul Dresser, brother of the novelist Theodore Dreiser. This was one of the rare instances in which Dresser's set another man's words to music instead of his own, and then Henry appropriated that tune and wrote, underscore this, underline, or rather dictated new words with which sentimentalized student life in this valley. Thus was Mary, Mary, Where Have You Gone? Transmogrified into the alma mater of this campus until it became a penitentiary 2 years ago. History. Accident after accident has made Tarkington what it is today. Who would dare to predict what it will be in 2021? Whoa. No way. No way. That is insane. Only 20 years from now. So it must have been 92 then. Yeah. 91. Sorry, 91. God, my math is bad. The two prime movers in the university are time and luck. As the tagline of my favorite dirty joke would be it, keep your hat on, we could wind up miles from here. Keep your hat on, we could wind up miles from here. How's that a dirty joke, though? I guess their definition of dirty joke is different. This whole paragraph is like its own thing. Alright. If Henry Mellencamp had not come out of his mother's womb dyslexic, Tarkington College wouldn't have been called Tarkington College. It would have been being the Mohawk Valley Free Institute, which would have died right along with the wagon factory and the carpet factory and the brewery when the railroads and highways connecting the east and west were built, far to the north and south of Skopje, so as not to bridge the lake, so as not to have to penetrate the deep and dark virgin hardwood forest, now the Iroquois National Forest to the east and south of here. If Henry Mellencamp hadn't come out of his mother's womb dyslexic, that if that mother hadn't been at Tarkington and so known about the little college on Lake Mahoga, this library would have never been built and filled with 800,000 bound volumes. When I was a professor here, that was 70,000 more bound volumes than Swarthmore College had, among small colleges. The library used to be second only to the one Oberlin, which had 1 million bound volumes? No. Yeah, I think it's 1 million bound volumes. So, what is this structure in which I sit now? Thanks to time and luck, it is nothing less, friends, and a neighbor than the greatest prison library in the history of crime and punishment. It is very lonely in here. Hello? Hello. I might have said the same sort of thing back when this was 800,000 bound volumes college library. Is it very lonely in here? Hello, hello? I have just looked up Harvard University has 13,000 volumes. Oh, okay, no, that was one. Yeah. What a read, and almost every book written for or about the ruling class. If Henry Mellencamp hadn't come out of his mother's womb dyslexic, there would have never been a tower in which to hang the Lutz Carleon. Those bells might have never been gotten to reverberate in the valley or anywhere. They probably would have been melted up and made back into weapons during World War I. If Henry Mellencamp has not come out of his mother's womb dyslexic, these heights above Skopje might have been all darkness, and the cold winter night 2 years ago with Lake Mahoga frozen hard as parking lot, when 10,000 prisoners at Athena were suddenly set free. Instead, there was a little galaxy of beckoning lights up here. So I think that's where I'm going to end it for today. So 22 pages in. A lot of weird coincidences, a dark sense of humor, but there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel of this book, I can tell. That's usually what he does. He does play along with those differences. I gotta brush up on some things. But that's okay. This is just a trial, a test, if you will. I'm enjoying it. I think I'm going to do this more often. I'm going to crack a book, have a beverage, and read along to some stuff that I've been wanting to check out. So, how long was that anyway? I'm not sure. Not too sure. My bookmark. Bookmark that. Finish this. What's that? And yeah, I'll probably be playing Yakuza 0. Actually, not until later on. I don't think I'm going to be playing it right away because I got some things I gotta get done first. So I should do that, and then I will be back with some Yakuza 0 if you want to tune in for that. So I'm trying to aim for about, 5, 6 Central Time, around then. So that was the first 3 chapters of Hocus Pocus by Kurt Vonnegut. And yeah, I probably will continue this book. I might pick a different book, and I'll just kind of just like I do with the games, I'll put them in playlists, so that way if you ever want to go back and check them out, or just, have them organized in the playlist, that way they'll be there. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and I will try to be back on later on today. Storybook Gamer signing off. Until next time.